All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the third session in the Let's Talk Housing, Creating a More Affordable Future for People in San Mateo County. I'm Christy Wong with Baird and Driscoll. Let me share my screen. Brandy, if you don't mind admitting people from the waiting room, that would be great. Not this one. So if we have any Spanish speakers, we do have an interpreter available. So I'm going to turn it over to Isabel to explain how to use the interpretation feature on Zoom.
Hola, buenas tardes, noches a todos y todas. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Acá vamos a tener hoy una función de interpretación. Yo me llamo Isabel y soy su intérprete. Entonces, si necesitan interpretación simultánea en español durante el evento, deben mirar en la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom y deberían ver un mundito en el lado derecho. Entonces, para tener interpretación simultánea, deben hacerle clic a ese mundito y ahí van a aparecer los dos idiomas. Deben escoger español y ahí me podrán escuchar durante todo el evento interpretando simultáneamente.
Great. Isabel, I'm going to turn on the Spanish channel now.
Okay.
Is that working? Okay. All right, thank you, Isabel. So feel free to jump in and remind the speakers and me if you need us to speak more slowly. Again, I'm Christy Wong with Baird and Driscoll. We've worked with, Baird and Driscoll has worked with all the jurisdictions in San Mateo County for over a decade on housing policy, including the housing elements and the Let's Talk Housing San Mateo outreach effort that this is a part of. So what are we doing today? Let's Talk Housing is an outreach effort of all the cities and towns and the county in San Mateo County. We're trying to increase awareness of and participation in the housing element update process, which is required by the state and currently underway. Our goal is to make sure everyone is involved in shaping our shared future. Oops, sorry about that. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about the intersection of housing and racial equity and a lot more. And 2 weeks before that, we got a grounding in why housing affordability matters. And today we're here to talk about housing and how it intersects with climate change, which is one of the other large, major crises of our time. So I'm going to share a snapshot of our agenda for today. Our first item is to hear about the Housing and Climate Readiness Toolkit. Home for All is a countywide community collaborative aimed at producing and preserving housing at all income levels. Let's Talk Housing has partnered with Home for All on many efforts already. Home for All partnered with Climate Ready San Mateo County, a county initiative that works with cross-sector and community partners to coordinate knowledge sharing and collaborative action to prepare for climate change impacts within San Mateo County. They've produced a toolkit to help jurisdictions develop climate-ready housing that will be released in the coming weeks. Joining us tonight, we have Hillary Papendick, Program Manager for Climate Ready San Mateo County, and Jessica Mullen, Program Manager for Home for All, to provide an overview of the Housing and Climate Readiness Toolkit. Great, welcome Hillary and Jessica.
Thank you, Christy. We are excited to be here and to be able to showcase with all of you the work that Home for All and Climate Ready SMC has been doing over the past 2 years in sort of looking at the relationship between housing and climate. Christy, are you going to run the slides?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I think we can kind of go ahead and dive right in. Hillary and I sit next to each other in the Office of Sustainability, and we talk a lot about our efforts around climate change and housing. And over the years, we've had a long-going conversation about how do we ensure that our housing is climate ready for the future. And so we partnered our two initiatives, Home for All and Climate Ready SMC, to really look at how can we promote sort of best practices and policies amongst the jurisdictions to really help our housing address various climate changes that we're seeing here in San Mateo County. So tonight we're excited to share the work that we've been doing, and we are also looking forward to publishing this toolkit within the next few weeks. So if we can go to our first slide. When we talk about housing in San Mateo County, we really want to look at the types of housing that we're building here in the county. As you all may be aware, we're currently wrapping up our RHNA cycle, which is our Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Every 8 years, jurisdictions are asked to plan for future development, and in hopes that we can be able to build the housing that is seen that we are expected to need over several years. And currently in this housing, in our current RHNA cycle, while we're doing incredibly well in our above moderate income housing, as you can see sort of in the off to the far right, we've far exceeded what was expected that we would need in that income category. We are not doing as well in our very low income and moderate income housing, and we know that we have a lot of work that we need to address here. Our current RHNA housing cycle called for about 16,400 units of housing to be built throughout San Mateo County. We are going to be entering a new RHNA cycle here shortly from 2023 through 2031. It is expected that San Mateo County will need to permit over 47,600 units of housing amongst the 21 jurisdictions. So that's well over double our current housing allocation that we see here. So in doing that, we wanted to really think thoughtfully about how we prepare that housing to be climate ready, knowing that we're seeing a lot of climate impacts here, not only in the Bay Area, but throughout the state and the nation and the world. So if we can go to our next slide. So in San Mateo County, San Mateo County has really been a leader in looking at our climate impacts here in the county. And what we know here at home is that we are going to be dealing with several impacts in terms of climate here in San Mateo County, whether it's through higher temperatures, sea level rise, increasing extreme storms, or wildfire risk. And we have a lot of efforts underway to really plan for those efforts. And what we wanted to do through this partnership is sync up those planning efforts with our housing efforts to really identify how we can build housing that will be ready for climate impacts in the future. We can go to our next slide. So in doing that, we looked at all the best practices related to climate resilient planning, as well as our safety elements, our local hazardous mitigation plan, and our SMC recovery initiative, which is looking at the economic recovery from the pandemic, as well as our RHNA, our regional housing needs allocation, and our housing elements, which all the jurisdictions are updating to accommodate the 47,000 units of housing that we'll need to permit in the upcoming cycle. And with that, we wanted to think about what are some of those policies that we could look at to ensure that our housing will be ready for what we anticipate experiencing in terms of climate change in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hillary, who can talk about sort of can speak to more about the climate readiness efforts within the county.
Great, thank you, Jessica. And next slide, I have my assistant with me here. So I wanted to just go through some of the efforts that we have underway, and this initiative with Home for All really builds on a lot of the efforts that we've been doing through Climate Ready. And our Climate Ready program focuses on these three main areas: understanding the risks of climate change, planning and preparing, and informing, engaging, and implementing projects. And collaboration is a part of all of these aspects. So next slide. So here's an example of some of the projects that we have underway that fall into these different categories. One, we're currently working on the South Coast Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment, and this is for the area south of Half Moon Bay to the county border, and fills out this is a gap in the 2018 vulnerability assessment that the county developed. So we're completing that, and we'll have a full county vulnerability assessment. Jessica mentioned the safety elements. The county is going to be starting to update the safety element soon to address SB 379 and climate change. I know some cities have updates underway, and we're looking at what tools and resources we can help provide in addition to this toolkit to help meet those climate change requirements. And the hazard mitigation plan is a multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. It was 36, involved 36 different entities this time, and it will be going to the board next week and then to the subsequent entities boards. So it had all 20 cities as part of the plan this year. And the hazard mitigation plan is related to climate because it takes a preparedness approach and outlines different actions that the cities and jurisdictions involved with the plan can take to reduce the impacts of hazards before they occur. And also is a requirement to be eligible for FEMA funding to help fund a lot of those projects that will help reduce our impacts. And climate change was integrated into the throughout the plan. We also have some Resilience Hub pilot projects, and these are intended to help provide some on the ground support to community members in responding to the issues that are happening right now. So we're working with a senior center on the coast side and then a church on the bay side to evaluate what types of actions would help create centers that could be places of support during disasters. And then our Climate Ready Collaborative, we're looking to relaunch that this coming year. So next slide.
Thank you, Hillary. So in pulling together this toolkit, we really wanted to look at a lot of different data sets and methods to really sort of identify what policies we needed in order to ensure that our housing will be climate ready. So in doing that, we looked at the demographic analysis of the county, looking at spatial analysis, identifying where our priority development areas may overlap with our key climate hazards, as well as doing a lot of stakeholder engagement, whether that was through participation in our task force, as well as conducting informational interviews with a lot of our key community stakeholders, whether they're cities or planning institutions, developers, as well as other regional organizations. And then we reviewed over 50 documents to really look at how public and private agencies were trying to address this issue, as well as any case studies or best practices that we wanted to highlight to really showcase a path going forward for housing and climate. Additionally, when thinking about how to put this together, we also wanted to showcase that there's a lot of intersection, that housing could be a solution to climate change, as well as that we could adapt our housing to be climate ready. And we found this quote from the NRDC last year to really sort of hit home to the goals that we were trying to achieve through our toolkit. The NRDC sort of showcased that the same improvements that make homes better able to withstand and recover from weather-related crises also make them healthier and safer to live in when sheltering in place during a pandemic. I think that's something that we all saw firsthand during the pandemic, and something that we wanted to carry with us going forward as we put this toolkit together. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Hillary, who's going to walk us through the different strategies that were identified in throughout the toolkit. Hillary?
Oh, great. I just saw a comment that Millbrae approved the hazard mitigation plan last night. So that's really exciting. Can you advance 2 slides, please? So now we're going to get into the toolkit, and the toolkit outlines a number of strategies and case studies to assist with building housing in a more climate resilient way. And it really isn't it's really a part of a suite of strategies for helping to prepare for climate change. So as Jessica mentioned, it compiles research from UCI. It's designed to help decision makers and practitioners balance the tension between housing goals and planning for climate impacts. Sorry for all of the background noises. So these are the climate impacts that we looked at in the toolkit. Wildfires, extreme precipitation, flooding, erosion due to sea level rise, and extreme heat. It also looks at increased debris flows due to the combined impact of wildfire and extreme precipitation. So it includes 10 different, if you go to the next slide, there's 10 different strategies in the toolkit, and they're divided out by which climate impact they address. So the slide shows the first 5 strategies. The first one, this is about incorporating resilience considerations into general plan updates. So this could include hazard overlays, promoting high density infill away from hazard areas, so in low hazard areas, or building in setbacks where needed. This is a cross-cutting strategy that addresses all climate impacts. And next is the city, the next one on that, you could go back to one slide there. Yep. City level civil rights policies refers to what cities can do to incorporate civil rights into their operations. And flood-proof construction, an example of this would be elevating the base flood, the first floor of your home. And stormwater management, an example of this is green roofs. And then CAL FIRE review, this involves, CAL FIRE has. I'm right here. And then CAL FIRE provides support for meeting the requirements of for fire safe standards. Next slide. So these next 5 strategies, the first is also to address wildfire, and this is about making changes to development to help plan for wildfire. An urban tree canopy policy is about a policy that local jurisdictions could pass to help increase trees and help the health of the urban canopy. And then urban design for heat resilience is about looking at how we design our communities to help reduce urban heat island impact. Passive building design is changes to the actual building envelope and the way a building is constructed to reduce the need for air conditioning. And then cool roof standards, this is about lighter pavement or reflective coatings on roofs to help reduce the heat impacts. Next slide. Great, now I'll turn it over to Jessica. Thanks.
Thanks, Hillary. So we are in the process of finalizing the toolkit. We did convene a task force through Home for All, comprised of a variety of community stakeholders to help us identify which of these strategies we should highlight, and then policies and best practices that fall within each of these strategies to really showcase through this toolkit. So our task force is reviewing the toolkit. We hope to finalize that and share that out within the next few weeks. We're looking at sharing it out through social media, newsletters, email distribution. We also are hoping to host potential webinars for elected officials, city staff, and community stakeholders to provide an overview for the toolkit, as well as some education and messaging around the toolkit and the strategies for how our housing can be climate ready. And so with that, Christy, I think we're a little bit over time, so we apologize, but we are available for any questions that folks might have about the toolkit. We hope it'll be a resource for cities and the community to really think about how we can continue building housing during climate change, and how we can build a climate resilient future here in San Mateo County for our residents and our future generations.
Great, thank you both of you for and your assistant for this presentation. It's really exciting. One quick question: where should people go online to find this when it is released?
So we will hopefully be able to. It will be at our Home for All website, which is homeforallsmc.org. We will probably have it as a main feature in under toolkit and resources in our drop-down menu. So we know that it will definitely live there. And in addition to sort of having a summarized version of the toolkit, we'll also have an appendix that has all of the policies and best practices. I believe there's over like 50 or 60 of those within a spreadsheet that jurisdictions can and communities can refer to. Hillary, are you thinking about sharing it out on the Climate Ready SMC website as well?
Yes, we'll also be on the Climate Ready website.
Great. There is a question in the chat about converting grass fields to plastic and removing trees, and whether the county is doing something to slow this kind of damage that might be happening in the county. this might not be related to this specific conversation, but okay, I'll take it that you won't be able to answer this question.
Yeah, I was just reading through it. I'm not aware of any efforts that Office of Sustainability is doing on this front, but Jessica, do you know, have any additional information?
No, we can follow up and follow up with the mayor about this, but as of right now, within the Office of Sustainability, I don't think we have any efforts on this.
And then there's one more question. Will the county be proposing model ordinance language that cities can adopt?
Well, within the toolkit, there's sort of a list of different policies and best practices with resources and links that cities can consider. So we can either be incorporated, into various plans and policies. We don't have sort of model ordinance language for every single one of the policies and best practices, but we do have links and resources for those plans and best practices.
Great. Well, I thank you so much for joining us to tell us about this toolkit, and it's very exciting news that it'll be released soon. Now we'll let you go to your evening.
Great. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you. Next, we wanted to do a quick demographic poll. Sorry, let me switch something. So I'm going to launch a poll and just a few questions for us to be able to understand who's joined us today, and really to be able to understand more about who are the people that we're not reaching and that we want to be able to reach in the future. So thank you for taking a minute to answer. There's just 6 questions. If you've participated in one of these before, they're the same questions. Plus, have you joined us before for Let's Talk Housing events in the past? So I'll wait and give you a minute to participate in this. Thank you. Just a few more seconds. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Maybe I will get started and introduce our speaker today. Amanda Brown-Stevens is the Executive Director of Greenbelt Alliance. She is a nationally recognized expert in climate smart development and resilient communities. Her strategic vision for Greenbelt Alliance and the Bay Area as a whole are informed by her experience in advocating for well-planned cities and towns and the protection of our region's iconic Greenbelt lands. Prior to this role, Amanda oversaw Resilient by Design, a design challenge that saw local communities partner with design professionals and other stakeholders in search of innovative ways to strengthen the Bay Area's resilience in the face of increasing sea level rise. Before that, she spent several years raising hundreds of millions of dollars to improve and support communities throughout California. Amanda spent the first part of her career both at Greenbelt Alliance and as a chief of staff to Oakland Council member Nancy Nadell. So now I'm going to hand off to Amanda to take it from here. For now, if you can hold your questions, but feel free to put them in the chat to be addressed in a bit. I'll either facilitate questions from the chat or call on raised hands. So thank you, Amanda, and I will bring up your slides.
Thanks so much, Christy. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I appreciate the time, and if you just want to move here, hold on a second. Yeah, you just want to move to the next slide. So
You know what, I'm gonna switch, sorry. I realized I should probably do full screen rather than slideshow, otherwise it will go of its own accord. Okay, here we go, sorry.
Great. So Greenbelt Alliance is an organization that's been around for decades. Our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. We're fortunate that Bay Area residents have always been motivated by protecting nature, and we know now the need is more urgent than ever. We're fortunate to live in a region with a strong level of environmental awareness, and we have lots of people that have dedicated time to fighting climate change and protecting our communities. At the same time, local climate advocates and activists can feel sometimes frustrated about being here at the local level and seeing action or inaction in Washington and beyond. Like we're seeing this week at the climate talks in Glasgow, many of us would like to see further action and more quickly. Fortunately, there's a significant and meaningful action we can take here at the local level. We have a way we can be more resilient to a changing climate, reduce our climate impact, and be more inclusive. Seems like a no-brainer, right? All we have to do is build more homes right here in our own neighborhoods, cities, and towns. But when we talk about this strategy, even among the most passionate environmental advocates and activists, we sometimes get some questions or some level of skepticism about how these things are connected. So what I thought I could do tonight is do this presentation basically in a question and answer format, except I'll be doing the questions and the answers. So hopefully this will work out. Hopefully I'll touch on some of the questions that you may have. And in some cases, you may even have better answers than I have. So feel free to share those in the chat. So first, let's kick off. Next slide, please. So the first question I have, and the first question we get is, why does where we build matter? Greenbelt Alliance advocates for what we call climate smart development, sustainable, mixed, affordable, resilient, and transit oriented, creating resilient communities that are in balance with nature. Go back to the previous slide, sorry. How is this connected to the climate? The relationship between housing and climate emissions is pretty clear. As cities that are near job centers make it hard or impossible to build housing, for example, single family zoning that de facto bans apartment buildings, people who are priced out move further away, resulting in sprawl that covers up farmland, open space, clogs freeways, and increases greenhouse gas emissions. We as a region and as in these local communities have the power to reverse this trend by embracing new development. Next slide, please. Transportation overall accounts for the largest portion of total US greenhouse gas emissions, about 30% nationally. And in California, we're actually doing better in how we in our conversion to clean energy, but not so much in transportation. So transportation is about 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in California. In fact, vehicles traveling just on the California state highway system are 21% of all greenhouse gas emissions in California. So you may ask, why am I talking about transportation so much? I thought we were talking about housing. Well, where people live makes a huge difference about why we're doing all that driving, how that driving is connected. And residents who live in infill areas, a recent study from UC Berkeley showed drive up to 90 fewer miles per week. If we could convert more people to living in infill homes, we could take the equivalent of 400,000 cars off the road each year. There's also great economic reasons for living close to jobs, schools, and increased transit options. These decrease residents' spending in both transportation utilities pretty significantly, and allowing people to capture these savings could be a great economic engine as well. So this clearly creates a connection between why we should build homes near transit. One question that we get a lot, though, for people who are pretty supportive of this work is, this means that we need to build transit-oriented development, which we're very supportive of. But we have many communities, lots of places in San Mateo County aren't particularly close to the type of transit that they can use on a day-to-day basis. There's BART stations, there's Caltrain stations, but there's not necessarily a great subway or bus system like other communities have. Next slide, please. So as we talked about, new homes within existing cities near jobs reduce overall per capita emissions significantly, even if transit is not great. I think this is a key piece that we need to talk about more, because as conversations around housing elements are happening in different communities, there's a lot of questions about how we're building or where we're building in places that are within existing cities that are close to jobs but aren't particularly near transit. However, driving short distances from residential neighborhoods to jobs can make a huge difference in reducing our overall greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a key part of our climate solutions. Adding good bike and pedestrian infrastructure improves emissions even more. And we know that lots of people in the Bay Area and beyond want to live in bustling downtown, vibrant neighborhoods, close to bars, close to restaurants. And at the same end, we definitely want to make sure there's enough of that type of housing near transit. There's also lots of other people who prefer quieter streets and neighborhoods, but none of us want to sit in traffic, and none of us want to have that added expense and added greenhouse gas emissions of all the driving. We've seen in recent years that adjustments like making it easier to create ADUs have helped more people find homes in these family-friendly, desirable neighborhoods. Light adjustments in zoning in residential areas to allow, say, duplexes, fourplexes, can be a great way to expand our housing options and reduce greenhouse gases significantly. Another benefit is this type of zoning changes can allow us to welcome young families, immigrants, and other new members of our community to find the types of neighborhoods that they prefer to live in. So another benefit of this type of housing is often these smaller units use less energy, and by increasing the number of units through zoning changes, there's no added cost to our community or to our taxpayers in subsidizing the need for new affordable homes. These homes tend to be more affordable as well. So another question that comes up a lot in the context of the connection between housing and climate is the actual building of homes. That takes energy, and can new homes actually reduce emissions over time? As we're an organization focused on land use, I'm not going to get into the details of green building and its benefits and how it works. However, the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in California is the building sector. So there's a lot of opportunity to reduce our emissions by more sustainable construction operation as we do building. So this is another added benefit. Additionally, homes use energy. And new homes tend to be built to higher building standards that use a lot lower, have a lot lower energy costs, particularly in heating and cooling. I also wanted to mention that wealthier Americans do tend to have much higher per capita carbon footprints than lower income residents. And this is primarily due to larger homes. In especially affluent areas, emissions can be up to 15 times higher than nearby neighborhoods. And overall, on the neighborhood level, the average house in a high density urban area within the San Francisco Bay Area produces 3 times less emissions than the single family homes in nearby suburban areas. So there's really a pretty significant shift as we move toward more homes within our cities in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that our homes produce, or that we produce in our homes. Next slide, please. So you may be thinking, this all makes sense. Okay, I understand overall why development is good within cities. But here in California, we have a particular issue. We're increasingly in what seems like a nonstop drought cycle. And we know from what climate scientists tell us that it's only going to be getting worse. California has always had challenges with water. We understand that we're entering a permanent state of drought. How could we be contemplating building new homes? So this is a good question. And before I get into some of the answers to this, because I think there really are ways we can do it, I just want to take a little bit of time to talk philosophically about collective resources. Water is a resource we all share. And in order to address the challenge we have about how we allocate that resource, we need to think collectively in a way that's often challenging and uncomfortable. As we think about climate change, that's another collective resource problem. We know that we have to work together more than we like to and more than we ever have before, both at a local level and particularly even city by city. We know that cities can't protect themselves from wildfire without collaborating with other cities. Cities can't protect themselves from flooding without collaborating with other cities. Floods and fires are not going to stop at a jurisdictional boundary. How we address the water issue is a similar challenge. Say we don't have enough water in the Bay Area, we're not going to build anymore. We're pushing residents out to the Central Valley, out to Nevada. They're moving to Phoenix. These are places that have even less water. So we're not solving the problem, we're just shifting it somewhere else. So I would challenge us to really think about how we're addressing scarce resources in a way that really starts to solve some of the big problems we have, rather than just shift them to another neighborhood or another community. That said, there are some great ways that we can actually reduce our water use significantly and accommodate many more homes as our region grows. So I think as a lot of people know, agricultural use is the biggest use of water in California. And at the same time, the agricultural community is more motivated to figure out how they reduce their water use because water is increasingly scarce. So agricultural use is decreasing, while residential use has stayed pretty static over the last generation, even as we sometimes have mandated conservation. So we have a lot of opportunities for improvement. In fact, Spur just recently released a report saying that 2.2 million new homes could be accommodated over the next 50 years. And we can offset water use from this growth through just modest improvements in water efficiency and more compact land use. One thing I wanted to point out is for the residential water use, 50% of that is outdoor water use. So as we think about how we use our space and we use our land, if we think differently, but think creatively about how we can landscape in a way that significantly reduces water, we can actually build lots more housing without worrying about the water issue. So now you may be saying, okay, this is great. We really need more housing and we need to build it within this region. So another question we get a lot, especially as Greenbelt Alliance, is that, okay, so we know we need more housing. In fact, we urgently need more housing. We're in a crisis. So do we really need to protect all this open space, protect all this farmland? Wouldn't it be easier to just plan new developments outside of our cities and not bother existing residents? And I just wanted to make sure that before we wrap up this evening, that to back up a little bit, and since I jumped into the benefits of housing from a climate perspective, and didn't really get a chance to talk about some of my favorite topics around the incredible and varied benefits of protecting the natural assets that surround us. Our open spaces have benefits that we've celebrated for years. They help with clean air, with clean water, with recreation, with food, with natural habitats. And as we start to face the climate hazards that the team earlier was talking about that are particularly intense in San Mateo County, these natural areas really benefit our in protecting ourselves against those hazards. So we'll just take a little interlude to highlight some of these benefits. And we're going to run through the next slides pretty quickly. Keep going, sorry. So protecting green belts around cities means that we can manage landscapes that reduce fire risk to those existing communities and have been shown to significantly reduce destruction and damage if we protect and maintain those green belts around cities. Next slide. Agricultural lands can not only capture carbon and provide significant benefits in that way, they can also build fire breaks and wildfire resilience, as well as fresh local food. Next slide. Shorelines can enhance habitat protection and protect existing communities by restoring wetlands and investing in natural infrastructure that increases habitat for fish and wildlife. Next slide. And we're really fortunate to live in an area of very high biodiversity. In fact, the land that's closest to our cities often has the highest level of biodiversity. These lands can provide protection to our communities and provide the many ecological benefits of having open spaces and recreational areas. Next slide. So really the final question here is, do we have enough land to do this? And the answer is yes. If every available infill parcel in California were developed to its full potential, we'd be able to build 4 million additional homes while protecting 350,000 acres of undeveloped greenfield that's currently at risk for development. But, and this is where we get into the topic of tonight and how communities move forward to face their housing elements and planning for future growth. In the last housing element cycle, the Bay Area was only successful in permitting 57% of housing units within the city designated priority development areas. This means that we're not doing enough to protect our open spaces and get all those benefits while ensuring we have enough homes for people to live in. So why is this? Restrictive zoning policies force people to find homes they can afford outside of areas which they work, driving up greenhouse gas emissions that could be curbed with shorter commute and access to public transportation. How cities and counties shape their housing elements can go a long way toward changing this moving forward. Next slide. So in conclusion, this really does lead us back to the topic of the day. And as you guys start to think about where housing should go, what some of the challenges are, what some of the things you're worried about, real questions about what our communities look like moving forward. I also want to highlight that, and I think, if you're following the talks in Glasgow and the climate science that's emerging, we really are at an inflection point today. We need as a society to choose if we're able to do the work to change quickly in the most positive way possible, or are we going to delay until more catastrophic paths are the only option? I'm here today to talk about how housing policy is climate policy, how these are connected. I also wanted to point out, and this probably goes without saying, but housing policy is also housing policy. And if we don't change the way we approach building more homes, we're already seeing the results around the Bay Area. the dire consequences of inaction in homeless encampments and friends and family having to move away, being priced out. In this region, we've come together at challenging times before. We lead the nation in innovations and change, from environmental protections to incredible technology. We can take collective action. We can collectively take the most effective action possible at the local level to reduce our climate impacts through one simple step: accelerating housing growth within our cities and towns. The process to get there is challenging, but the answer to what we can do at the local level most effectively to impact our changing climate is pretty simple. Build homes close to where we live. Next slide, that's the end. Thanks so much for your time. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, but happy to answer any questions, or Christy, you'll tell us what we're supposed to do next.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have some, there's a little conversation in the chat, I think, about somewhat about transit-oriented development. I think, I have a question, which is that there are often controversial projects that are located, within the boundaries of the Bay Area, but located in sensitive areas, or there's the burrowing owls in Mountain View, or trying to think, I think the Salt Flats is another project that was controversial. How do you think about balancing, the sort of local environmental impacts with the broader climate impacts of new infill development?
I think if we look at the space we have and how we develop as a region, if we think differently about what is an appropriate development site, and I think one of the things we've seen in recent years is a shift in openness around and an understanding of how we can slowly modify many different types of neighborhoods to build more homes throughout cities. So it's not concentrated in necessarily just in the downtown, but it's also, we don't have the need to build on wetlands, to build on salt flats. I see someone has a question about how to define infill. I know that actually is a question at the statewide level right now. Do we have the appropriate development definition of infill? We generally at Greenbelt Alliance think about development within cities as infill. Development outside of cities is where we want to protect, as kind of a shorthand for what we're thinking about, although there certainly are environmentally sensitive areas within cities that don't make sense to develop, and plenty of places that within cities that I would say there's lots of creative ideas about how we're redeveloping commercial areas that are no longer being used. And I think we have a lot of creative solutions that don't go to starting with habitat, ecologically sensitive areas, or wetlands.
There's a question. What do you say to people who live in the Oakland Hills to say no ADUs, et cetera, because of fire danger?
I think there's some good mapping going on at the state level to kind of get more details around risks, and it's, there's everything is about nuance, right? I think there's places in the Oakland Hills, I actually live in Oakland, so I'm pretty familiar with the area, that where there's wide streets, there's plenty of space, there's perfectly appropriate for building ADUs. And then there's narrow streets that really are unsafe for ingress, egress in a fire, where likely no development should happen. And I think we can see that in lots of different places. There's not going to be a blanket solution. And particularly when we're looking at that, what they call the wildland urban interface, places where high wildfire fire risk intersects with where lots of people live, there's going to be different solutions in different places. If it's a rural area with a few homes, that's a different question than if it's the Oakland and Berkeley Hills, if it's the Los Altos Hills. There's just going to be, it's going to have to be a solution that works for a common sense solution. So if you live in a place that's easy to get in and out of, great. If not, we don't want people to be unsafe.
So there's a question, is Greenbelt Alliance creating a map of potential infill areas that are ripe for development? Or maybe if you know of another organization that might be.
That's a great question. Greenbelt Alliance, we have a few board members still around that have been around for 30 or 40 years, and a couple of them mentioned a big report that Greenbelt Alliance did in the 1980s called Room Enough or something like that, that showed where development could happen. And I think actually MTC and ABAG and the regional agencies have now a lot of this information around where development can happen in a way that there's less need for organizations like Greenbelt Alliance to get into that mapping detail. But I think it's a really interesting question, and we definitely are looking at where those maps intersect with making sure that there's climate hazards are overlaid onto those maps. So, and particularly as cities go through their housing elements and looking at, are there adjustments that need to be made to state law moving forward to ensure that hazards are part of the housing element conversation and part of the housing element input in a way that I don't think they are right now. So with that said, I think there's a lot of information out there about where development might happen, and again, especially looking creatively about, could we look at old commercial corridors? And then can we think about ways that these various terms like missing middle housing or gentle density or other ways that we can start to introduce small numbers of homes throughout communities rather than just only concentrated in those, what we call traditionally downtown areas.
So if I'm a homeowner and I already live in a single family neighborhood and I'm not planning on, packing up and moving to a condo downtown right now, what's something that I could still do to reduce my climate impact or my community's climate impact?
That is a great question. Well, the best thing you can do is support your neighbors or other places in your community that may be appropriate for development. Maybe there's a parking lot, maybe there's an area where someone wants to add an ADU or a duplex to their property. So 1, don't oppose it. 2, support it. And really come out and you can. This is a big thing. You can testify, you can at planning commissions, at city councils, about how you see the benefits of welcoming more people into your community, which you probably really appreciate, enjoy, and love because you live there and it has all the great things that you appreciate there.
There's a question about, can you elaborate on multifamily water use versus single family home water use?
So, okay, let me just, like I said, there's actually a report that just came out from Spur that has more information on this. But one of the things they mention is that multifamily housing tends to have smaller lot size per housing unit, which reduces the per capita amount of water needed for outdoor landscaping. New construction also needs to comply with current building codes, which is more efficient and also has more efficient landscaping requirements. And older buildings tend, many single family homes are both bigger and older buildings, so they tend to accumulate plumbing leaks over time. So those are some of the highlights.
If anyone else has any more questions, maybe we will bring a close to this, raise your hand or speak up if you'd like to get one more question in. And I guess, Amanda, is there anything that Greenbelt Alliance is doing in San Mateo County or in the Bay Area that you want to highlight before we let you go?
Yes, thank you for asking that. And Greenbelt Alliance we are working on something a little bit similar to the toolkit that was mentioned earlier. We're calling it Resilience Playbook. It's going to be released next month. We have a release date on the 7th of December, and it will talk about in narrative form the challenges communities are facing related to resilience from flooding, from wildfire, from housing and housing availability. And it also will be a compilation of policies that existing Bay Area communities are currently using to address these various resilience hazards. We're super excited about this compilation of all these different policies in one place that should be easy to use. It's a website, easy to search. And we'd love to have people use this. We'd love to work with you to tailor recommendations for your community. And we see this as a living document, a way that we can really highlight what's working in different places and share those resources and best practices around the community and around the region.
Great, that is exciting. We'll include a link to your website in our follow-up materials so people can look for that in December. Great, thank you so much, Amanda. Really appreciate you taking the time this evening to chat with us.
Thank you.
We are going to do a quick breakout session to give you a chance to connect with other members of the community. So the prompts today are, I think, as we've said before, what's something new you learned today? What were you surprised by? And then maybe also, I would say, what's something that you might do to reduce your community's climate impact in the future? So Brandy, if you are there and can do the breakout sessions, I do want to say, actually before that, if you are listening and you are participating in the Spanish channel, if you can raise your hand or put a note in the chat, and we can make sure to put you in the same room as the interpreter. So I think we're going to give folks about 8 minutes. The breakout rooms will be in groups of around 4. You won't have any facilitators in the room. So please be cognizant of how much space you're taking up, be respectful of other people's opinions, and make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. So let's make those breakout rooms. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us. We're glad to have you. Just wanted to put a few closing messages out there. Let me just share my screen one more time. Let's see if I can mess it up again. We would really appreciate your feedback for improving our future sessions. We have one more of these webinars, but we use your feedback to improve our events and our meetings in general. So if you can complete the post-event survey, that would be great. That will go out in the post-event email as well. A reminder that we are collecting housing stories and experiences to help put a face to communities' housing challenges. So you can get to that on letstalkhousing.org. And we have our last webinar on December 1st, where we'll talk about placemaking and design, and how we might create desirable communities in a way that brings all of the key priorities that we've been talking about. So racial equity, climate, affordability all together. And so, letstalkhousing.org is your resource for future events, signing up for the last webinar, and any other resources that you might want to get, including getting involved in your community. So thanks again for joining us, and hope to see you on December 1st. Take care.